Hello and welcome. Today, just going to do on the TOEFL author's purpose question and just going to tackle one of those. So let me just get my little pen here. And what you want to do is you want to read the paragraph, highlighting, underlining the key terms, key words in the paragraph one. So first of all, you want to look at in paragraph one, why does the author mention traveling between? So you want to look at why does the author mention, so that's an author's purpose type question, traveling between two major cities in the United States. So why does the author mention traveling between two major cities in the United States? So the paragraph starts off with, life in America and the nation itself looked very different at the start and close of the 19th century. So at the start and close of the 19th century, life in America looked very different. In 1800, 93% of the people, so you always want to pay attention to those percentages, in the United States lived in small towns or on farms, and 2/3 of those people lived within 50 miles of the Atlantic Ocean. They had no concept of fixed time. Towns set their clocks based on the rising of the sun, and when it was midnight in New York, it was 11:55 in Philadelphia. Travel between these two major cities took 2 days by horse and carriage, prohibitively slow for most people who had little reason to travel in any case. Their concerns were decidedly local, not national. The country even had a national anthem. Didn't have one until 1812. Of course, all has changed quite quickly with the rapid industrialization, westward expansion, and political unification, processes that are difficult to imagine without one company in development, the expansion of the railroads. So you kind of want to, look at keywords as you go along, and then, underline them, and then paraphrase and think, okay, what was that all about? So talked about life in America was very different at the start of the 19th century and at the end of the 19th century. People lived in small towns. There was no major system of telling the time. Basically, life moved a lot slower back then, and things were very different, very slow, very different. It seemed laid back until the development of an expansion of the railroads. So that might have brought about change, right? That would suggest change. It said, of course, all the change that quickly with industrialization that are difficult to imagine without one thing, which was the railroads. So let's look at the question. So why does the author mention traveling between two major cities in the United States? So let's look at exactly where they talked about that. So traveling between two cities. So it says travel between these two major cities, meaning New York and Philadelphia. It says took 2 days by horse and carriage. That's a long time when you think about it, between New York and Philadelphia, it really isn't that far. Today it's a couple of hours by car. It said travel between these two major cities took 2 days by horse and carriage. Slow for most people, but who had little reason to travel in any case. So things were a lot slower down back then. All right, so let's look at the answer choices. And again, you want to kind of come up with your own answer before you actually look at the answer choices. So if you look at that, it says travel between the two major cities took 2 days by horse and carriage, which seemed very slow back then. I'm sure seems even slower today, obviously. But if then you think to yourself, okay, well, why they mentioned that was maybe to kind of show that, hey, things moved a lot slower back then. To get from A to B took a lot more time. than it does today. So if you look at the answer choices, you have to explain the incentive behind the railroad, development of the railroad. Okay, that might be a possibility because it talked about how things were slow back then until the railroad came along. To illustrate how different life was in the United States before development of the railroad. Okay, that seems also like a good fit, right? Because it talks about how things were much slower. To suggest that power, both political and economic, was dominated by the population centers. So I didn't see anything really about politics there, so we can get immediately get rid of that answer choice. And then to emphasize the difficulties of living without a standardized system of time. I did mention about the standardized system of time, but that wasn't what the sentence we were supposed to focus on. It talked about the traveling between two cities, right? Took 2 days. So we can get rid of that one. All right. So then you look at these two choices and you say, okay, cool. What did they actually ask us again? Why does the author mention traveling between these two major cities? To explain the incentive behind the railroad. Well, at this point, they haven't really even mentioned the railroad up to this point, right? It said living in towns, they had no concept of fixed time. Things were slower. The travel between cities took a lot longer. So I think it was more this one, right, to illustrate how different life was in the United States before development of railroads. So I don't think, I think it's kind of here, it's just like painting a picture of what life looked like before the railroads. Yes, obviously, taking 2 days to get from Philadelphia to New York was probably a good incentive to expand the railroads. But I think the purpose of this sentence and this paragraph in general is to paint a picture of what life looked like before the expansion of the railroads. So that's a good way to get your right answer choice. That was the right answer. And the main thing is underlining, looking at the sentences, using process of elimination. The main thing is put it into your own words of what the answer choice is, and then choosing your answer. Okay, good luck with that. All right, so let's see.